exploration well confirms world-class find. More oil. Exxon reports 1.4 billion barrel of oil find. Second well confirms Guyana's massive oil reserve. With big oil discovery, Exxon puts Guyana on the map. These were some of the exciting headlines that greeted us in the last 2 months as the world began to come to grips with the news of our inheritance. And we, as Guyanese, a people who have yet to own that seat at the table, began to embrace the reality of extreme prosperity and, yes, fame. How? A long-awaited oil strike that allows us to be the recipients of possibly over 1 billion barrels of oil. Minister Trotman coins the balance very well, however, when he says that whilst we find this find propels Guyana into a realm of prosperity that can have a lasting impact on generations to come, this can only be achieved by balancing the immediate benefits with sound wisdom in planning and managing the resources as well as the revenues it brings to Guyanese. This caution of sound wisdom in the context of newly found riches reminded me of an episode of the Oprah Winfrey Show I saw a few years ago about a homeless man named Ted Williams who was given $100,000 by a movie director who wanted to do a documentary to see what a homeless person would do if they got rich. The man was filmed from the moment he received the money, and the cameras followed him as he spent it. What did he do? At first, he couldn't believe that he'd come into all that cash. Next, he called everyone that he knew and told them about all the money that he'd gotten. He bought an expensive apartment. He fixed his teeth. Bought a truck for himself and for one of his many girlfriends that he got. And eventually, 6 months later, after receiving $100,000 US, Ted's balance was less than $5,000. Depending on how we look at it, there is much we could learn from this story. What stood out most for me is that it's not just about money. Money, wealth, riches, without a plan and the capacity to manage it well, will bring you right back to the point where you started, and in some cases, a worse place. For us to get the best out of our newfound wealth, albeit a few years off, we will have to learn how to manage it. We do this by educating ourselves in the broadest and most relevant sense possible. This is the basis on which this lecture has been organized during Mining Week 2016. The Ministry of Natural Resources has, over the past year or so, strategically engaged and facilitated various capacity building exercises in the form of seminars, workshops, presentations, and short courses, which have at every stage served to inform this new course and impart the sound wisdom needed in this time. This lecture heralds yet another stage and a new phase of engagement as we work to get Guyana geared for our emerging oil sector, and is made possible in partnership with the University of the West Indies of Trinidad and Tobago, one of the most respected institutions in the Caribbean. Through this partnership, we have the opportunity to draw on the educational experiences and development of our oil-producing big brother, Trinidad and Tobago, here in the person of distinguished Professor of Practice, Andrew Jupiter, who will be sharing shortly with us about the importance of education in the development of the oil and gas sector. When we add this lecture to what we've already learned and continue to learn, we will be better placed to avoid what is known in natural resources circle as the resource curse, and a term that I would want to coin, the Ted Williams syndrome. Thank you very much and welcome. We're happy to have you. So we'll get straight into our program for this afternoon. And first up, we have remarks by a very distinguished gentleman, Professor Dr. Ivelaw Lloyd Griffith. He is the 10th Vice Chancellor and Principal of the University of Guyana. And Professor, I want to apologize up front. I did read your bio, and I condensed it immensely because it's wonderful. So I am apologizing way up front for anything that I missed. No disrespect meant. All right? All right. He served as executive in residence at the University of Albany, State University of New York, and the 9th president of Fort Valley State University in Georgia, one of his many, many, many posts. His education and expertise, and this is where I contracted everything, right? Forgive me. His education and expertise spans many disciplines from academia to political science, and he's considered as an expert in areas including Caribbean and hemispheric security, drugs and crime. And I understand that you're also a passionate advocate for civil engagement. I share a similar feeling. He's also a writer, and what stood out for me most about his bio is he's a pioneer. And that's what we need here in Guyana, pioneers. So I want to invite to the podium to give brief remarks Professor Dr. Ivelaw Lloyd Griffith, 10th Vice Chancellor and Principal of the University of Guyana.
Okay, good evening. I want to begin by thanking the Minister, the Honorable Minister Trotman, for the invitation. And I'd like to commend the Ministry for this initiative, an initiative that in itself is education about the industry in which we're about to engage. One of the greatest philosophers from the East who has made an impact on the West is a philosopher called Confucius. And I was reviewing some of his analects that had an impact that spoke to both education and planning. And I'd like to share with you one of the Confucian analects that I think is quite appropriate for the enterprise about which we're beginning to have a conversation. And this is what Confucius said. If you plan for 1 year, plant rice. If your plan is for 10 years, plant trees. If your plan is for 100 years, educate people. Let me repeat that. If your plan is for 1 year, plant rice. If your plan is for 10 years, plant trees. If your plan is for 100 years, educate people. I think the prescience of Confucius's analect is pointedly relevant not only to any nation that has an enterprise that it wants to embark on with significance. Nations have got to engage in long-term planning. But when a nation is about to embark on a new venture, a venture as petroleum and gas, it has to engage in significant long-term planning. In other words, it has to honor what Confucius was recommending and educate people. And I would contend that the education of the people to whom we are referring is not only children. We have got to educate in our nation adults, children, and people of varying ages. And so I want to commend the minister and the ministry for beginning the education with this forum. And Minister, if I were to offer a typology of education that's relevant to oil and gas and any other significant industry, I would say that the education that we need to be embarking on, the kinds of education that we need to be thinking about, is not a one-dimensional education. And I would offer 3 categories of education that we need to be paying attention to. We need to be paying attention to the technical and managerial part of the enterprise, having the engineers, having the technicians at the variety of levels. But I think it's also important for us to not forget those allied industries, those allied fields. And it's partly because, Minister, I think it's important that we not forget those allied fields, that part of my mandate to a team we're going to be bringing to the University of Guyana to look at establishing a business school at University of Guyana is to pay attention to logistics and supply chain management, to pay attention to the financial accounting, because to make success of an industry, and the lessons of Trinidad and countries beyond our hemisphere have shown, you've got to take a broader than the technical and occupational in the industry itself, looking at those allied areas. And so my recommendation would be to, in the first category, broaden the perimeter of the technical to include those allied areas. And I'm sure Professor Jupiter will talk a little bit about that. But if you were to identify, I think, a second important or category of education, part of which is reflected here, is the importance of what I would call governance and civic education. This nation is embarking, to use Star Trek terms, on a venture going to a place we've not gone before. We have got to have the maturity as a nation to have the political and business elites engage in the education. We've got to have the maturity to do what other nations did not do in the beginning, and that is prepare adequately the legal and administrative mechanisms to ensure we minimize the amount of pitfalls and mistakes. It's a delight that we already have lots of advice embarking on the Sovereign Wealth Fund. But I think there's a reality of our embarking on the governance domain, on the civic and the governance domain, where we would require our political and economic elites not to do what Trinidad in one respect erred in its early part, not to put so much energy on oil and gas and neglect the other industries. We cannot neglect agriculture. We cannot neglect manufacturing other than for oil and gas. So I think that part of the education that it behooves us all to embark on is to remind ourselves, the civic, the business, the political elites, that while oil and gas is now the new top of the game, it is not the only economic game, and we cannot afford to neglect the other important industries. I would contend as well that part of the governance and civic educational challenge is going to be managing some of the expected and unexpected consequences. The government of the day will have to manage the illegal and legal migration. Guyana got a bad rap for a long time of having people run to parts of the Eastern Caribbean. People are going to be coming from the Eastern and other parts of the world to Guyana. That is not something we should not prepare for. We have got to be proactive and enabling the governance and the civic elites to be mindful of that reality. Whether we like it or not, oil will attract from within this hemisphere and from beyond. But let me get finally to my third educational category. And when I think of this category, I'm reminded of something that Charles Dickens said: we are living in the best of times and the worst of times. Oil, as other nations have shown, will bring to this nation a combination of that good and not so good. And so my recommendation is that as part of the preparation, the educational preparation, it behooves us to pay attention to what I would call some of the pathologies that tend to come with oil. Whether or not we like it, crime will increase. Whether we like it or not, prostitution will increase. Oil and other forms of wealth have a way of testing a nation and a people's moral fortitude. We have got to embrace all the elements to manage that aspect. People will neglect their families in going to parts of the country where the oil money is running. And so child abuse, child neglect, neglect of families. And so, Minister, ladies and gentlemen, I would recommend that as we pay attention to education on the broad landscape related to oil and gas, it is necessary to go beyond the civil, mechanical, and other engineering. It is important to take ambit of the broader landscape. And I will end where I began by reminding you of the wisdom of the Confucian analect that says, if you plan for a year, you can plant rice. If you plan for 10 years, you may plant trees. But if you're planning for 100 years, it is incumbent on you to educate your children. For me, this is part of the education of our children. And I want to end by commending the Minister and the Ministry for this laudable step. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Griffith. I enjoyed your words, brief words, but sometimes we hear a lot. We don't have to be eternal to be effective. So thank you very much for sharing with us. One of the things that really stood out as I listened to you is you mentioned expanding education in terms of making provision for other education in relating to business, and our education not just being, the regular things that we're accustomed to, but allied arts, and that is very important. I also heard in your presentation that our education needs to be very wide and varied, and for me that says that there is a role for each and every ministry, there's a role for each and every person. As you made the links between the different sectors, there's a role for Ministry of Social Protection, there's a role for everyone to be a part and get on board as we learn to manage what we have well, right, for years. Thank you. Now I have the pleasure of inviting our Honorable Minister, Minister Raphael Trotman, to come and deliver brief remarks.
Thank you for that. Good evening, everyone. Honorable Speaker of the National Assembly, Minister, my colleague, Minister, friend and brother, Minister Jordan, who carries the weight of the country on his shoulders and does so very well. Our distinguished Vice Chancellor, thank you for your words of caution, but at the same time of optimism. Our guest, distinguished Professor Jupiter, and as I look across, my friend, Member of Parliament and Chairperson of the Natural Resources Committee, Mr. Odinga Lumumba, special invitees, colleagues, heads of agencies, thank you for coming. As we heard, this is the first lecture, but not the first event we've held in terms of oil and gas. This evening belongs to the future. It belongs to the students of Guyana and those who are aspiring to be students. And so tonight, before going any further, I'd like to recognize in our presence some special guests, and these are guests who we've invited. The first, I believe, is the person who has topped the country with 19 grade 1s and 1 grade 2, Ms. Fatima Karim. Good evening and congratulations. Is Mr. Tiwari here, 19 grade 1s, making his way here. Mr. Joshua Inderjit, please stand. Congratulations and welcome. Mr. Joshua Ferdinand, another student from Sparendam. Is he here? We thought we'd invite our students to join us tonight because when I read the newspaper, both Ms. Karim, I believe, and Mr. Tiwari expressed their views to the press that they wish to become petroleum engineers. And I thought we are about to have a lecture, and it would be the right thing to do to invite them to be a part of this journey with us. So the nation will support you. The nation will watch and see what you both become, all of you, in fact. And so later in the evening, we have some special gifts we'd like to give to you. So the program says brief remarks, and so I will not be long, except to say that since the discovery in 2015, May of 2015, the government has been working very assiduously and steadily to prepare the country for the inevitability of becoming an oil and gas producing nation. We have held seminars, workshops, we've attended conferences and symposia. We have been on training in Azerbaijan and Minister Jordan and I had a study visit to Uganda just a month ago, very interesting. We have been to Louisiana to understand the nature of oil spills and how to address them. We have been to Kenya, Barbados, Washington, Mexico. We've collaborated with the US government, the Canadian government, Mexican government, the EU, the European Union, the Commonwealth Secretariat, Chatham House, and now we are collaborating with the government and people of Trinidad and Tobago. This lecture is a part of a series of events of nation building and capacity building. And we take, again, Professor Griffith, your words we hold them very dear, and we know that this has to be a national effort. And so later this year, we hope to have another seminar organized by Chatham House, where we will open up to professionals, lawyers, and accountants, and others who wish to understand the services, and internally having officers of various ministries understand the very nature of what oil does. It could be a blessing as much as it can be a curse. We are, even as we speak, deepening our ties with the government of Trinidad and Tobago, and only this afternoon, the Minister of Energy of Trinidad and Tobago, the Honorable Ms. Nicole Oliver, met with the President, His Excellency David Granger, and we agreed on cooperation and collaboration on 5 areas: education, infrastructural development, oil and gas development, ecotourism, and agriculture. And so indeed, it just can't be that we are looking to develop our capacities in the oil and gas sector. And now for a word on Professor Jupiter. I first encountered Professor Jupiter last year, October, when he came as part of a United Nations seminar, and please forgive me, I omitted to mention the UNDP as part of our sponsors and development partners. And so, in fact, last year, October, Professor Jupiter presented here in Guyana, and I was very impressed with what I'd heard. I met him again in January of 2016, early this year in Trinidad and Tobago, and again my impressions of him were reinforced and strengthened. He is, in my humble opinion, a world-class expert, and by the end of this lecture, you will agree with me that this is a quite an apt accolade to bestow. His experience, as you would see written on the program, spans the various spheres of activity of oil and gas production and development from downstream to upstream, both as a policymaker, as an advisor, and as well as a practitioner. And he has earned the very enviable distinction of being named Professor of Practice, something which we hope we can aspire to here in Ghana as well, which is an honor that is bestowed on distinguished professionals. Mr. Professor, some will even say Dr. Jupiter, is one such professional. I will not go through his very long CV. It spans many pages. We've tried to condense it into a few words. But as I said, hear him, judge him, appreciate him. Thank you for coming, and may we have a very enriching evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Chairperson, Ms. Chandel France, Honorable Raphael Trotman, Minister of Natural Resources, Honorable Minister Jordan, Minister of Finance, Cabinet members, members of Parliament, Professor Griffith, Pro-Vice Chancellor and Principal of the University of Guyana, permanent secretaries, chief executive officers, members of the Mining Committee, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen, a pleasant good evening to you. I was pleased to see the Mining Week 2016, and thanks very much, Minister Trotman, for those warm words of greeting this afternoon, as such. And I was impressed by the words so far of Professor Griffith, and I knew it was a means of inspiring me next to him to say some of the things which I plan to quote Confucius also. But in Mining Week, extracting minerals, underscoring safety, protecting the environment. Throughout the world, those important words are critical for survival of any industry. So I want to thank very much the Mining Week Committee that put forward this together. Minister Tretman, I wish to thank you for inviting me to speak at the Guyana Geology and Mines Commission Mining Week 2016. I was told yesterday that the week has been successful. I'm indeed honored, even more so, when I heard that this is the first public lecture. But more than that, to speak on the topic, the importance of education in the development of the oil and gas sector, experiences and perspectives of Trinidad and Tobago. Under normal circumstances, when I was told to choose a topic and a topic was given to me, I said immediately, yes, I will speak on that topic. But then, a few days afterwards, in the wisdom of Minister Tretman, he sent another topic for me. And I'm very pleased with that topic. Because I love contractual arrangements, and I've spoken a lot about contractual arrangements today. But it is so fitting. And therefore, ladies and gentlemen, I want to say it has been a difficult journey for me, but a great one. 45 years locally and internationally to have been associated with this petroleum industry, which some have argued it is second to none. Allow me, ladies and gentlemen, to peek into history over a century ago, taking consideration that you have asked me to speak about experiences and perspectives of Trinidad and Tobago. The first well was drilled in 1857. And I can recall a few years ago in 1986, when I was at Pennsylvania and I had a lecture, I indicated the first well was drilled in 1857, and the professor said, that's not correct. The first well was drilled in Pennsylvania by Colonel Drake in 1859. And as a trainee from Point Fountain, the oil belt, I had no other alternative but to stand up and bring to him the facts, 1857. So for that day only, for 5 seconds, I rewrote the history book. And that allowed me to get a B in that course. The only B I got at Penn State. So young people who are here, sometimes you have the temper of how you challenge. And I want to say that. That's education also. That does not mean that you must not challenge. And therefore, commercial oil production, okay, I am sure I was right, because the Aripero well was drilled in 1857. But this one they were unable to dispute this one. Commercial oil production commenced in 1908 in Trinidad and Tobago. Commercial oil production. Therefore, in terms of age, Trinidad and Tobago is a senior member of the World Oil Producing Fraternity. In terms of age, we stand side by side with Iran, even before Saudi Arabia. So today, I am very pleased, Minister, that I can come and speak on this particular topic, bringing to bear various policies and structures that have shaped and guided the development of the energy industry in Trinidad and Tobago. Hold your seat this evening, because I started indicating about the history. But that history tells us there were good stories in the petroleum sector, and there were bad stories. Just as in the Olympics, there were good times and bad times for each country. I wish to join in congratulating Troy Davis for making the finals in the triple jump. I took note today in the Gleaner, said government pledges support for future Olympians. So come 2020, I am sure you'll not only be the best in 8 in one, but you'll be best in 8 in many more. The people of Guyana, you are in a great place today. You have one of the best, if not the best, in the world oil company. One of the best, if not the best. Technology, number 1. Capital, deep pockets. Well-trained individuals, top-class individuals, great negotiators. I can talk about them. I was around the table with them, so I know about them. That's great. But I wish to state, you have the resources. The resources belong to you, and therefore you are in a great place. The importance of education in the development of the oil and gas sector. Experiences and perspectives of Trinidad and Tobago. The New York Times on the 1st August 2000 said, oil revenue is managed well. If perchance it is managed well, it can educate, heal, and provide jobs for the people. But oil brings risk as well as benefits. Rarely have developing countries used oil money to improve the lives of the majority of citizens or bring steady economic growth. More often, what happens? Oil revenues have caused crippling economic distortions and been spent on showy projects, weapons, and Paris shopping trips for government officials. That's New York Times, 1st August 2000. I'm sure that will not be written about Guyana. And why am I saying this is because I sense there's a difference in the manner in which the Guyanese people are approaching this particular find. So let me start. This lecture seeks to suggest a number of priorities in developing a guide for the development of the energy sector in Guyana, in which the main goals objectives should be the maximization of value from Guyanese energy resources and to position Guyana as a player in the global energy market. Additionally, it is recommended that the exploitation of these non-renewable resources must be done in a manner that seeks to maintain a balance between the rate of extraction and the distribution of returns between present and future generations of Guyana. There are other elements that are critical to achieving the required balance, including, but not limited to, optimal distribution of potential energy sector revenues by the state, that's optimal distribution, 2, production and use of energy without generating harmful emissions or encroaching on the environment. And 3, creation and nurturing of intellectual capital to add value to the economy. And that's the reason why I think I've asked me to speak today. And I want to repeat that. Creation and nurturing of intellectual capital to add value to the economy. Based on the aforementioned, which I've just mentioned there, the following are thus regarded as important steps for the development of the Guyanese energy sector, and in this regard should be considered priority objectives for the state going forward. And I just want to mention about six areas, and I am doing that in the context of my lecture this afternoon. 1, and I heard the professor rightly spoke about it, craft a legislative framework that will encourage the expansion of the country's energy sector in a manner that promotes significant local ownership. 2, establishment of a regulatory framework that creates an attractive investment climate but also protects the sovereign rights of Guyana and its citizens. 3, create a greater level of private local participation along the energy value chain. 4, increase the level of people's skills by developing appropriate strategies, building institutions, enterprise development, and creating a cadre of energy leaders in Guyana. 5, ensure compliance with environmental standards, adopt global health and safety good practice. 6, focus on partnering with communities through education, training, and cooperatives. This lecture speaks to a number of objectives set out above and how the Trinidad and Tobago energy sector development experience can provide Guyana with a glimpse of the possible issues, pitfalls, and opportunities that the development of the country's newfound petroleum resources may bring. So that was my introduction. And therefore, even to speak about education, the professor will tell me you have to define it. Define education. And that is what I have there for the start. I have a broad definition and have a narrow definition. And I got it from Mark K. Smith. He explores the meaning of education in his book. And a broad definition of education is the wise, hopeful, and listen to the words, and respectful cultivation of learning, undertaken in the belief that all, A-L-L, all, should have the chance to share in life. All, every Guyanese person. That means you. That's the broad definition. And one may ask, why did you put a narrow definition? Because sometimes you have to come down to the brass tacks of the people you deal with. Narrow definition. A narrow definition of education is the process of facilitating learning or the acquisition of knowledge, skills, values, beliefs, and habits. So you must have some values if you have education. You must have some beliefs. You must have some habits. I'm coming down to the man, to you and I. And you must have, very important, knowledge. The wise man Solomon spoke about knowledge and understanding. If you have knowledge, you shall also have understanding. And 1 year after Trinidad and Tobago became independent, the then Prime Minister, Dr. Eric Williams, decided that we set up a commission called the Mustafi Commission. Because we became independent in 1962. And from 1908, which I mentioned to you 1857, the first oil well, we didn't have control over our resources. The colonial masters did. And royalty was only a few cents per barrel in those days. And when the governor was in Trinidad, some intellectuals went and said, we need more, so we want to bring in a consultant. They brought in a consultant. And I want to tell you today, people of Guyana, beware of consultants. I am a consultant. Because the consultants work for many people. And this consultant stated in his report that he can only increase the royalty by 2 cents per barrel. Because he never took into consideration the natural resources belong to the people of Trinidad and Tobago. I'm talking about education now. I'm going to go there. So what Dr. Williams did, he set up the Mustafi Commission because it was the first year after independence. He said, no, it seems that we can control our resources, we are independent. And there were 3 important questions he asked. Important terms of reference. 1, to examine the present situation and future prospects of the oil industry of Trinidad and Tobago in the context of the economics of the world oil industry. That is relevant right now. 2, to recommend a legal framework, which I just spoke about, for the oil industry of Trinidad and Tobago, which would stimulate the operations of foreign investors, while safeguarding the interests of the nation. 3rd point, to make recommendations designed to ensure the greatest possible stability comparable with growth in the industry. Including the level of employment. Ladies and gentlemen, I will return to the level of employment in a while, and I will return to the Mustafi Commission at the end of my speech. Could you go back to the slide before, sorry? Thank you. The one before, thank you. Yeah. I will want to talk a little bit now about linking the energy sector to the education sector. One of the key ways that the state can ensure that all its citizens benefit from the development of the country's energy sector is by creating strategic linkages between the energy and non-energy sectors. In this regard, the link between the energy sector and the education sector is critical. The global energy sector operates in a highly competitive international environment. As a result, the local Guyanese energy industry will have to achieve and maintain international performance standards. The experience in Trinidad and Tobago has shown that these standards over the years invariably set a high bar for the quality of human resources that was employed in the sector at every level, from those involved in clerical and administrative tasks to craftsmen, technicians, lawyers, and engineering professionals. Drawing from the experience of Trinidad and Tobago, and given the stage of development of the Guyanese energy sector, a possible first step to the development of the required human resource for the sector could be the establishment of energy-based apprenticeship programs. Energy-based apprenticeship programs. These apprenticeship programs will aim to provide a continuous supply of craftsmen and technicians to support the needs of the emerging local industry. The output of this system should also seek to not only provide the foundation for the development of the Guyanese petroleum industry, but also its expansion in the future to possible refining, petrochemical, and gas-based industries. Given that these apprenticeship programs will be based on global industry standards, they can later serve as models as they did for Trinidad and Tobago for other craft and technician-level training programs implemented by non-energy industries and national training agencies in the country. I'd like to go to the slide about the formation of the Board of Industrial Training. That's the one before this one. The one before this. Before. Yes, I will start. Apprenticeship program, and we'll start from there. What helped Trinidad and Tobago was a board of industrial training. That was formed in the 1960s. At the age of 15 then, people left schools. That was the time, age of 15. And what transpired here, the Shells, the Texacos, the then BPs, the Tate and Lyle, and a government representative all got together and they formed the Board of Industrial Training. There was one common thrust, and that common thrust was a particular syllabus that all of them should do. So it means that if you went through the Board of Industrial Training, you were trained as a craftsman. The apprenticeship program started. I must say, when the government took over the various oil companies, that faded. That again, I'm going to tell you, a positive went to a negative. Not all positive when you take over a company, and there are many reasons for that. And then the National Energy Skills Center was then born when Atlantic LNG came into being. And Atlantic LNG was required to pay X million dollars to start a National Energy Skills Center. Then it was started because he had money. Following from that was the University of Trinidad and Tobago was formed, in which we wanted to change from the University of the West Indies in the context of having more practical oriented, whereby you do some of the work at the university and then part of it you go out in the field and you're going to do it. Why? You wanted to bring an individual that is fit for purpose in the workplace. I'm a graduate of UWI and I'm proud of that, but UWI graduates are very technical. They can run numbers. They are very good in that. When it comes to the practical, the first year out of the university, and that has changed now. People were so wanted to go and work, let's say in Shell or Texaco or BP, and they were prepared to do the training. And today, the key is how much money I'm going to get. It has changed. So I'm saying that Board of Industrial Training is important. Professional development in industries. I want to talk a little bit about this slide because I love numbers, and the debate will start from here. If you want to maximize value for Guyana by linking energy and education, you have to look at your future labor profile for Guyana's energy sector. My reference point, as I said, is Trinidad and Tobago. What these numbers state, within 5 to 15 years of your operation, 20% of your workforce will be engineers. About that, plus or minus, we can debate. But when you move after 15 to 20 years, 55% of the workforce becomes engineers, geoscientists, as the case may be. 55%. How do you move from a 20% to 55%? That's the debate you have to start. That's where the education process starts. I'm looking at the Trinidad aspect. What about technicians? I spoke a bit. It has been found that technicians are normally about constant across the board. So 5 to 15 years when you'll have 25% of a workforce, mainly technicians. And then when you go out in time, 15 to 20 years, that number is almost constant. But there's a change. In your first few years of operations in Trinidad and Tobago, we found the workforce, and what we found is that 55% of the labor was mainly crafts and diploma, and people will do plumbing, and people who will do electrical work, etc. Nothing wrong with those work, but those were the low craftsmen, diploma, etc. work. While when you increase greater than 15 years, what we found was 20%. That figure decreased. It meant that your future labor profile changed. And how were you able to ensure through education that you met that 55% for engineers, technicians, which I'll talk a little bit about today. So, let us look at the future labor profile for Guyana's energy sector. It is clear that the development of the energy sector in Guyana will provide the country with a large cadre of highly trained and experienced personnel with skills that are easily transferable to other services. That is, to construction services, to other services, not only our petroleum services. And you have to plan for that. The professor spoke of the boom. As is the case with Trinidad and Tobago, this makes the energy sector uniquely poised to play a catalytic role in providing expertise, safety and environmental standards, and quality human resources for development of the rest of the Guyanese economy. And therefore, ladies and gentlemen, you have to start with your contractual arrangement in order to achieve what I just stated here. That contractual arrangement is as follows. Join on the Trinidad and Tobago expertise. I will not call a company. You may be able to guess the company by the time I finish this. When we negotiated a contractual arrangement in Trinidad and Tobago with this particular company, and this is known because it is reported in Parliament, so it's not, I'm not saying anything that is not known. That contractual arrangement for education I'm referring to now, an administrative charge of $200,000 US during the first year of the contract, increasing annually at a rate of 6% for the unexpired term of the contract. So if the contract is 25 years, you start with 200,000 and every year you increase by 6%. Why is that administrative charge? Even though we have another law, which I'll talk about very much about petroleum subsidy. Why? You want the best individuals working in your ministry of energy. Don't get me wrong. If it is that most of the revenue seemingly will come from oil, don't you want the best? So that when you meet the Exxons and the Shells, you are able to negotiate with them. So every production sharing contract we sign, we included that administrative charge, increasing by 6% per annum. Why? You will have enough money that coffers will not come from the Minister of Finance at all. Even though it will go in a central fund, but that coffers will be paid by the oil companies for the technocrats, all the technocrats in the Ministry of Energy. And I'm saying, as you know, public servants' salary may not be very much. I saw 10% today on some papers. But what we were able to do at the Ministry of Energy was we increased. Sorry, go back there, please. Sorry. No, please. No, you have to go. Yes, thank you. Yeah, what we did in the Ministry of Energy, a note went to the cabinet saying that we recognize throughout the entire industry, finance and all these places, that you have to follow the status quo, what percentage everybody gets. But we have a special fund. And the minister was able, in some cases, to get an increase for technocrats in 2008, close to 75% of the basic, because we had the money. And that you were able to retain staff for a while and attract staff so we can get the best. Because if it is your revenue stream is coming from oil and gas, if you lose $1 per barrel and you calculate that in terms of how much production you get, it runs into millions. So the first thing we do, we created an administrative charge of $200,000. The second thing we did in the contractual arrangements, a churning contribution. A churning contribution of $200,000 US, 200,000 for the training of nationals in the appropriate field of study associated with the petroleum industry for the first year of the contract, first year. And increasing annually at a rate of 6% for the unexpired term of the contract, 6%. But that wasn't all. We said in the event of a commercial discovery, the amount shall increase to US $250,000. So see how excellent if this is a commercial discovery, immediately goes to $250,000. Why? You have revenue stream is better. In the year following the commercial discovery, and increasing by another 6% per annum for the remaining term of the contract. So a training contribution, that is a training nationals of Trinidad and Tobago in the best areas. I heard the minister said that they went to various countries to look at oil industry. That is what you have to do, because the oil industry is international, it is global. You must know what is happening. And I'm so pleased to hear two persons want to do petroleum engineering. Clearly, I am biased, I'm prejudiced. That's the best field that you can ever think about. Then, not only that, we said we must also have a research and development fund. A research and development fund contribution of $100,000 US, because you can do research in your country also. You can do applied research in your country. For the financing of petroleum-related research and development activity for the first year of the contract, and increasing annually at a rate of 6% for the unexpired term of the contract. And we said, in the event of commercial discovery, you must also have contractual arrangements that look at all areas if possible. In the event of commercial discovery, the amount shall increase to $150,000 US in the year following commercial discovery, increasing by 6% per annum for the remaining term of the contract. Some of that money is now being used at the University of Western St. Augustine, whereby we are looking at, and that's my role now, how we can get an additional 5% recovery of oil from the known oil reserves. That is like using radio frequency heating. And as you start, the oil companies are interested. BHP interested. BP interested. Repsol interested. I met a Repsol guy here this evening, they're interested. That was not all. I'm saying this because the resources are yours. And when the resources are yours, and you are inviting various multinationals into your country, that's great. It means that you have to see how can you improve your people and how you can improve your education system. All of this is education. All of this is education. But not only that, scholarships. 7 scholarships annually. 7 scholarships annually. And I'll put a plug in a short while for the University of Western's Masters in Petroleum Engineering. If perchance you had 7 scholarships, you come to UE and in no time you come back 1 year, 2 years, and you come back, you have a program whereby you have people well trained. And that is only was for one contractor. One contract I'm referring to. And in my day, while I was at the Ministry of Energy, I was pleased to sign 19 production sharing contracts and negotiate those contracts. And if that was all, you'd have said, okay, but we said we must have the best technical equipment. That's education. Because you can have scholarship. If you don't have the best technical equipment, what will happen? So we say our technical equipment must equal or even better than the oil companies. And therefore, what we did in that same contract, we had a technical equipment bonus of US $750,000. We don't only want
increase in salaries. We also want the top-class equipment, like for seismic processing and interpretation. We want that, and that is what we got. And ladies and gentlemen, that was not all. What we negotiated there was mainly for people in the ministry. We said we have to negotiate something further for the people of Trinidad and Tobago. And we got a signature bonus of 13 million US dollars. That after, within 10 days of signing the contract, that was deposited in Treasury. You can do whatsoever you want to do, health, roads, whatsoever, 13 million US dollars. I am here to say to you that that was very good. I mentioned to you, that's good, but there can be pitfalls. Even though you can negotiate those items for education, and that's a perspective, and training, and you had excellent negotiators from the government side. You had people from the best schools, including the University of the West Indies, Dundee, Institute of Gas Technology, Penn State, the Colorado School of Mines. And you name them. You needed to have good contract administration. You could have the best of contract, and you are not administering your contract, then you will have difficulty. And that was a pitfall. Because it's only the last few years, while seemingly I found myself at the University of West Indies and knew where the money was, we started to use the Research and Development Fund. And that is just one example. Contract administration should be even better or equal to the negotiators. Why? The entities that negotiate the contract with the multinationals, those are not the same entities administer the contract. In our case, it's the same entities because we are so small. And when the entities administer the contract come and say, I don't know what you're talking about, what spirit you're talking about of the contract. This is what I have before me, and therefore this is what I have to implement. So my discussion with you this afternoon is really to share with you. You probably don't know the power that you have when you have a resource as oil and gas. I was just back from the University of Texas in Austin. And when you see the amount of money that is put into research by oil companies there, that's the reason why the world is changing. Hydraulic fracturing, horizontal drilling, right there. And if perchance you just put 5% of that in Guyana, you'll see the difference that you'll make. And what that spin-off happens is not only the research in oil and gas, you will find there'll be research in other entities that will make you diversify, as the professor was saying. You'll get this evening. I urge you to consider negotiating these particular areas to the benefit of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. That's Trinidad and Tobago perspective. Yes. This is a complicated slide, but it's not complicated. I like to be simple. What I'm showing here to you is as follows. There are operational skills, that's the one at the end, whereby you'll have technical, managerial operations. You'll have those people, skills. You'll also need strategic skills. That's the reason why I spoke about the contracts. You have to have commercial people, very good. You have to have business development, analytical. You have to have leadership. And then you also have, as you go further up the pyramid, you have to have alliances and collaboration, technology transfer, innovation. The point was made today, it's not only engineers. That's not it. When you start, you have to look beyond. You have to look at local capital and public trading. That has nothing to do with engineers. That's where you want to go. And you must start now. So you have to look at the human capability, the enterprise development, and the capital markets. You have to be looking at that from now. Why? The resource that you have, as I read it. When you look at 2015, there isn't another area that got that resource as what you got in Guyana. If there is, then I'm not aware. And therefore you are the top bracket in terms of resource development as a country at this time. And that's the reason why Klaus Musa, the famous British, stated, education costs money, but so does ignorance. Not for a moment am I saying you are. I'm not saying that, but I'm quoting. You must know what is in your contract. Your contract, and work your contract for the benefit of the people of Guyana. Work your contract. Education costs money, but so does ignorance. You lose a lot. Ladies and gentlemen, in that context, we look at the role of the state. The state is very, very, very important. I was fortunate, I must say, to work with successive governments throughout the years from 1987 to now, successive governments. And I don't think I understand everything about the state, but I think I understand a little bit, working with the level. And the state is powerful, extremely powerful. Members of a cabinet, they're extremely powerful. MPs are extremely powerful. The state can deal with regulatory framework, sites and allied infrastructure, institutional capacity, facilitating commercial production, state enterprises, and I'll touch on a few this evening, human capital, strategic investments, and framework for incentives. I'm just showing them more. And that is in the context you have to look at education as you move forward, to build a Guyana that will be probably the most powerful country in this region in the next few years. And I want to remember the words of 1962 Independence Day. I was a young boy. And I heard these words that I'll never forget them. The future of the nation is in your school bag. Never forgot those words. And those words tell me the future of the nation is in my school bag. And I want to tell you, at that time I didn't have a school bag. I was looking for one. Because I was in an area called Grand Riviere, Togo, northeast of Trinidad and Tobago, right up. And in that village, we had no school bags. In that village, I said, I wanted to understand what I couldn't figure it out. Where is the future? But that propelled me to do a few things to get a school bag. And that was in secondary school, to get a school bag. I said, I want a school bag, so I have to do something. But I am saying this to say, but he did not stop there. Most of us stop there and see the future. He said, he charged school children, in your future career, you will have responsibility for money. That is not yours. Whether in the government or a private firm, make honesty the guiding principle of your lives. Let your ambition be the development of a nation, distinguished by the honesty and integrity of its citizens. Ladies and gentlemen, may I postulate that is the importance of education. That is what the importance of education. That at a piece. We quote the piece in the school bag, but few quote what I have just stated there. That is the importance of education. Honesty, integrity, the guiding principle of your lives. So it's not only getting a degree, and that is great. It's not only getting a master's or PhD, but to be taught your ambitions be the development of a nation, make honesty the guiding principle of a life. So the state is important to do that. Very, very important. And then we move on to addressing issues for Guyana's role of education. I have a few strategic issues with respect to the role of education. I have to watch at my time now. Education will play a significant role in filling the human capital gap in Guyana's energy sector. So the first strategic issue is human capital development. Developing Guyana's human capital is one way of converting its below the ground, non-renewable petroleum resources into above the ground, renewable human resources. That goal is important, but the above the ground is what is very important. Third point, in this regard, education is critical to not only the sustainable development of Guyana's energy sector, but its overall economy. So I'm making a case this evening, ladies and gentlemen, for human capital development. Second point. Strategic issue number 2, strengthening institutional capacity. I spoke about the administrative charge, and I spoke what it did to the Ministry of Energy. Strengthening institutional capacity is critical to ensuring that Guyana is able to effectively plan for the sector, monitoring of the plans, and make timely, and this is very important, timely recommendations for appropriate alterations in strategy. You don't always get it right the first time, even though that is what you wanted. And you have to allow the state to timely recommendations to appropriate alterations in strategy. We didn't always get it right in Trinidad and Tobago, but we were able to make timely recommendations. In this regard, and one way of doing is what committees you have set up. A standing committee of energy was set up, specifically to make decisions. And that included ministers and technocrats. The technocrats had the same, if you want, I wouldn't say, the same position around the committee as the ministers. Yeah. So those technocrats that wanted to make a point all the time, they had an opportunity to make it, but there was a wise leader. And the point I am making here is this, that was an opportunity for technocrats from all the various ministries that were aligned to oil to be there with the ministers. So when a decision is made, you are able to implement that decision quickly. Because you know when a decision is made by cabinet, your role is to implement it quickly. So, ideally, it should be funded by both the public and private sector energy companies. I mentioned that. And funds should be used to commission studies. Important. Studies are very important. I heard that every person that you can think about that knows a bit about oil, Mr. Chapman has been touching on the doors. Every person. I can do this research. I can do this study. I can do that one. I want to share this with you. That's important. But you have to look and see clearly what that study is about and the objective. I'll share something with you. The World Bank, with all due respect, I hope there are no World Bank people inside here. The World Bank stated that we must be competitive in Trinidad and Tobago. Our oil industry must be competitive. And they brought in a team, excellent fellas, brilliant fellas, all over, really good guys. And they said to be competitive from where you are, if you really want to go and do some additional work, to be competitive, to make people come, you have to start with a cost recovery of 100%. What does that mean? You have to recover all your costs before you get 1 barrel of oil. All your costs. And you'll be competitive. Everybody will come because they recover all the costs. But with a natural resource, every molecule of oil that comes or gas, immediately the government should get a take. Immediately, because it belongs to you. So you have to put a limit on cost recovery. So the technocrats said, what's this? And you're hearing some people, yes, we want people to come, we want investors to come here fast. Why not give them the 100% cost recovery? And the technocrats were very clear. And we run the figures. If putting on a platform at that time was about $350 million US, when will we start getting back some money? So we put a limit to the cost recovery. And what we did there was we said you have to bid for cost recovery. That has changed now. Why? So if someone bid 40% cost recovery, what has happened? The other 60% is minister's share of profit, whereby it will go between contractor and employee. Somebody else may bid 30%, somebody else may bid 60%. So you run your numbers and then you get the best bid. Why am I saying this is as follows? Is that a lot of studies will be done, and that's good. But you have to have the objective, what do you want? Do you want many investors to come in the country? That's good. Or do you want to start getting the benefits from your petroleum resources? Very important. So the strengthening of institutional capacity is very important. And if you don't have those people, then you'll not be able to do exactly what we did in Trinidad. Enterprise development is the next strategic issue. Enterprise development is a key component of if local Guyanese businesses are to maximize value from the industry. Enterprise development involves the ability to attract, develop, and retain, that is very important, strategic business skills to ensure that businesses can grow, they can also change, and they can also succeed. That's important, that's business. World-class business tools, process and technology, because you're in a world-class business. And this is, other piece is very important. Competitive financing options. We failed in that one because the bankers never took the risk with respect to the local entrepreneurs. The risk was simple. If you purchase a car and you get higher purchase, you're sure you get back your money. But to put the money in the oil industry, the bankers never did it. Even now it's difficult. Competitive financial options they did not have for the local man if you want to build the local industry. Education will be key to developing local enterprises skills and lead to energy-based businesses being developed within Guyana, which in turn will lead to development of higher value added skills, and that is where you have to go. Not only in oil and gas, but we hear about agriculture and other areas. That is where you're going to go. Thank you. Now, to do all of that, you have to train people. And I thought that I cannot come here today and do not allow me, Minister Chetman, a little PR of the Masters of Petroleum Engineering for Guyanese students. I said, you have been very helpful. The University of Guyana has also been very helpful. The Minister of Education, and the Minister also of Natural Resources. I was told that some students here this evening who are thinking about doing a Masters in Petroleum Engineering. We want to thank you for those who are here. And I intend to leave this book. This is a proposal for the UE MSc program in Petroleum Engineering for Guyanese students for your consideration. I have a few here. Thank you. just to say, in our program, 199, we have graduate in Masters of Science. We have 110 diplomas, 162 BSc Petroleum Geoscience, 48 BSc Petroleum Engineering, 16 MPhil, and 3 PhDs. Right now, the leader of BHP is a graduate of a diploma at the University of the West Indies. He's leading the deep water drilling. He's a manager leading the deep water drilling, also a BHP for about 7 wells. He's a graduate from this university. That's the set of it. Not from Penn State or from Colorado School of Mines. And then I met someone earlier today who told me he's from Repsol, and his business manager, who's the second guy in the company, he's also a graduate from the University of the West Indies. Am I correct? Yeah. And I can go on, I can go on, I can go on. That persons who have taken the leadership role is from the University of the West Indies. Why not Guyanese come to the University of the West Indies? We have a program. And if perchance you implement the 7 scholarships for one company, we have a class already. Next, thank you. The role of education, strategic issue number 4, very important, developing legislative and institutional framework. In order to develop the Guyanese energy sector, it is critical that an enabling environment must be created to attract foreign direct investment. Also, critical to creating the optimal environment for the development of the sector is establishing the right institutional and legislative framework specific to the petroleum industry. And probably I should do it, because I think I should. We do have the following. There are about 17 pieces of legislation, and I just want to read them that you need to have in the petroleum. You don't need that. We have in the petroleum industry. The Petroleum Act, Chapter 6201, that came on stream just 7, 8 years after we became independent. The Petroleum Taxes Act, the Income Tax Act chapter is also one. The Income Tax in Aid of Industry Act, the Fiscal Incentives Act, the Exchequer and Audit Act, the Heritage and Stabilization Fund Act, the Foreign Investment Act, the Petroleum Production Levy and Subsidy Act, the Unemployment Levy Act, the Minerals Act, the Freedom of Information Act, the Integrity in Public Life Act, the Prevention of Corruption Act, the Environmental Management Act, and Pollution and Territorial Waters Act. All of that legislation. So therefore you have to have the lawyers and people who can understand the legislation, implement the legislation for the benefit of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. So there are about 15 legal instruments. So the development of resources trained in petroleum law will thus be critical, must be critical. Ladies and gentlemen, it's in that context, tonight, I just want to share some numbers with you, as I indicated to you that I believe in numbers, but statistics can also lie. Just remember that. Petroleum-rich countries, just before, we want to extract maximum value from the hydrocarbon resource. We want to develop a competitive world-class energy sector. We want to encourage the strengthening of the linkages between the energy sector and the rest of the Guyanese economy. We want to develop a framework of governance that establishes and maintains a clear commitment to transparency and ethical behavior. Very important. And we want to develop and adopt of high standards for health, very important, safety and environmental practices, as well as deepening of the sector's participation in local communities and social investment, which I'd like to talk a bit about later. What this graph shows, forgive me if you cannot see from the back, because we have asked to talk about Trinidad and Tobago experience, I'm talking about the relationship between natural resources, education and growth. What this slide shows is that the central government transfers to education increased astronomically over the years. The numbers can be seen as such, and it shows as follows that we reach as close to $30 million, over $2 billion in education, transfers from the central government. You see that graph? It shows how we have put money into education. Next graph, please. What I tried to do here is to show the relationship in the Trinidad and Tobago experience. Petroleum revenues were invested to provide TNT citizens with two things: free secondary education and tertiary level educational opportunities. The graph on my extreme right deals with secondary education. So it meant that that graph is on the upward, whereby at this point in time, over 90% of students get secondary education. Some people say it's free for all, it's free secondary education, but the numbers show is 90-something%. Then, it's probably who don't take it. Then we move into tertiary education. We were as low as 4%. Now we have moved greater than between 15 and 20% in tertiary education. Again, relationship between natural resources, education and growth. As we continue to get that money, what happened is that we were able to send more people to school. Tertiary education, you know what is happening in the gate now? Because our revenue stream has fallen. Next, please. And then what I tried to do here is to look at Guyana expenditure. Allow me, you can tell me I'm wrong with those numbers, but that's my role, to look at numbers. And Guyana expenditures on education, public expenditure on education as a percent of total government expenditure, as a percent of total government expenditure. And you see how that has been decreasing. While in Trinidad, that number has been increasing. We can debate the numbers, but that is the general trend. And this source is from the World Bank. World Bank. Again, the World Bank again. I'll share something with you. The World Bank has more information than we have, sometimes. That's a reality. And you have to get information from the World Bank. Thank you very much. Yeah. So this is just a comparison between relationships. I'm just showing these comparisons to show where we have to go, where we are and where we have to go. Next. Thank you very much. Now, this is the one that we may have some debate tonight on, because you have asked me to speak about the importance of education, and this will show you an importance of education. Those of you who are mathematicians, like you will follow what I just did here. Those of you who are not will still follow, because I've broken it down. The impact of petroleum revenue assumptions. I couldn't come here without doing that. Clearly, there may be a percentage error. But if based on a model PSA published in Guyana Geology and Mines Commission website, and these are the numbers I got, 75% cost recovery, a 50-50 production sharing, low royalty and taxation, let us assume there's a conservative estimate of 100,000 barrels a day production, estimated from a first well. Let us assume that. There'll be more, because I heard that there'll be more. If you estimate an oil price, you have to do a number of scenarios. You can do $35, but I am doing it in the long term. I'm doing it in the long term. I'm using a US $55 to $75, okay? And what I just showed to you is that 17% of revenue, the previous graph, 17% of revenue spent on the education sector is in line with the 2016 budget allocation. About that. I may not be so. If I'm even it's not so, let me know. This is what you will get. Please, next slide. And that is where we debate. The media normally takes these numbers, but I want to put these numbers in the correct percent. This is an estimate. This is rough. I have no knowledge of the Guyanese environment. I have no knowledge of the Guyanese environment. I plead the Fifth Amendment. But I need to share some numbers with you. Based on the estimate below, Guyana could see spending on education increasing between 20% to 80% above the current allocation of our $40 billion. This is Guyanese dollars. All I'm saying is that it is possible that 17% of revenue will keep it. You can spend between $8 billion to $33 billion in education. That's the only point I'm making. No other point. That is the range. The point I'm making here tonight is that when you find petroleum, you have more money to spend on education. So members of the media, don't quote these figures, I plead. All I'm saying is that these are rough figures to say that we have more money to spend on education. And that range, depending upon the oil price, can be as close from $8 billion to $32 billion. And therefore, the question is, how will you spend that money? Next slide. One must be local content. I shared with you, they were good and bad. We did some good things. One of the things which I felt we could have done better was local content in Trinidad and Tobago. We boast in all quarters that we are the #1 exporter of ammonia from a single source. We are the #1 exporter of methanol from a single source. At one point in time, we were the #1 exporter of natural gas to the United States of America, as such. And we can't usually design a methanol or ammonia plant, and we have so many engineers. I just showed you our 60%. Because one day you will not have methanol and ammonia plants. And if you are able to design plants, countries like Guyana that will have a lot of gas coming, you can design methanol and ammonia plants for them. And you can run those plants for them. So local content is an area that I felt we could have done better. We have a policy, but just a policy as such. And I wish to state categorically that it's important for you to move from the area of discussing one-to-one to the area of legislating local content. There are many people who only disagree. We did not do it in Trinidad and Tobago. And I think we could have done better. That's local content. Benjamin Franklin said, now I need to say something before I go to Benjamin Franklin, because I have to go to Confucius. I need to say this. On local content and philosophy, I can go on a lot. Benjamin Franklin said, an investment in education pays the best dividends. And I can hear the academia saying, so true. I want to use a phrase which I heard from the professor this evening. He said, I will contend. And I will contend that dividends can evaporate if one fails to plan. Franklin may be right, an investment in education, but all that investment can evaporate if you fail to plan for Guyana. Ladies and gentlemen, one of the problems we do have in the world, is one with corporate social responsibility. And if I can get the next slide, please. Thank you. Corporate social responsibility is part of the importance of education. In Trinidad and Tobago, when Shell started operating, they gave scholarships. And former President Maxwell Richards got a scholarship from Shell, Trinidad Limited, to go and study. Professor Ken Julian, the architect of the Point Lisa's Industrial Development Plan, with 11 ammonia plants and 7 methanol plants, got a scholarship from Shell. Kita Wong, who was the managing director of Petrotrin, he started from trade school, the apprenticeship, which I shared with you, and he rose to the position of managing director. He got a scholarship from Shell. Bashrat Ali, who was a senator, also, and he was operations superintendent of then Shell. he also got a scholarship from Shell. Barry Barnes, who was a Minister of Energy, a marketer, a wise man, he also got a scholarship from Shell. I can go on and go on and go on. What I'm showing you, Shell Scholarships Program definitely brought success, and I do hope a few years from now, the persons that may be leading Guyana, they too will have received scholarships from the individuals who will be here. Because this is a testimony. You give a scholarship, you come back in your country, and you make a tremendous contribution to your country. Not only sports too. CSR sport, part of the TNT experience. Point Fontaine was built on that, sports. You had the Mahaika Oval, you had the Shell Sports Club, and therefore you had players all over the world. That is when professionals started. The Rowan Archibald, the Leroy DeLeon, the John Stedman, you name them. The Henry Cohenby, you name them. That is also Shell. I don't want to say now what is happening to the Mahaika Oval, but Shell did that. CSR and support, that's part of education. And I've taken note that if you want to 2020 to be in Japan, it is very important for you to start that process. That's part of your education. Thanks. These are some of the names. I only talk about Shell, but someone told me I have to speak about the players that are around because there's some BP guys around. Christopher George, Shell Hotel Inns, also BP also has helped. And therefore, allow me to talk a little bit about Confucius. What Confucius said, education breeds confidence, confidence breeds hope, hope breeds peace. I want you to think about it a bit. Hope breeds peace. Confidence breeds hope. And you have to start from education. Education breeds confidence. Ladies and gentlemen, I want us to think about Confucius' words, because I think you need peace in the communities where the petroleum companies are operating, so that the operations will continue 24/7 uninterrupted. And in CSR, you have to employ the people who are in the community. 1987, I did a paper at Penn State, Mineral Enlightened Mineral Engineering Management. And I didn't recognize that when I read that paper today, it's the same thing that happened 29 years ago. It was happening in the country now. So that is very important in line mineral management. I told you I would return to Mustafi's commission. You remember I started with Mustafi? I want to wind up with Mustafi. When that commission, 1 year after the independence in 1963, I mentioned the terms of reference, but there were 7 questions that were asked, put forward by the government. Have we exploited the natural resources with diligence? Your children and your children's children will ask you that question. Have we exploited the natural resource, the resources which we have now? Have we exploited that with diligence? Question 2, has there been a just division of the proceeds of this natural heritage? Just. Is the company getting too much, or is the government getting too much? Is it just? Question 3, to what extent have we utilized the proceeds of the industry for the betterment of the nation as a whole? To what extent that we have used the proceeds for the betterment of the nation as a whole? I quoted the New York Times before I started. To what extent have we undertaken the training of our nationals? To what extent? For the further exploitation of these resources and national interests. To what extent have we undertaken that? The training of our nationals. Have we taken adequate stock of our international position in all of our activities in industry? and verse 6, number 6. To what extent are laws which may have been appropriate for the operation of an industry under the colonial system compatible with the aims and aspirations and status of an independent nation pledged to a democratic form of government? To what extent? And number 7, to what extent has there been a plan of development for the industry, and how far has this been coordinated in the development plan for the nation as a whole? There must be a development plan for the nation as a whole. And fall back. I wish to say to you, ladies and gentlemen, these questions, or some of them, not all, are still relevant to the people of Trinidad and Tobago today. They are still being answered. From 63 to now, we are still struggling with some of these. But it is important for you to get it right, and I do hope that your struggle will be at a reduced time than our struggle in Trinidad and Tobago. Next one. I want to wax a bit philosophical as an end, come to an end this evening, because the purpose of learning is growth. And our minds, unlike our bodies, can contribute growing as we continue to live. Our minds, unlike our bodies, can contribute growing as we continue to live. The purpose of learning. We have to be learning all the time. So I want to talk about those who may be over 50 and maybe of the view that they should not go back to school. This is an exciting time in Guyana. This is the time you must go back to school, because your life will be prolonged, because the quality of life will be better. The health care will be better. The system will be better. You will live longer. And you'll have a greater contribution to make to Guyana. Go back to school and learn something. Why? Others will come and take your job. You may not want to believe that, but it will happen, because you need the skills in the industry. And if the skills cannot be found here, you'll have to get the skills externally. Next one. And I had to talk a little bit about Plato. Plato adds, direction in which education starts, a man will determine his future life. So if it started at 50, you have a lot of life to live. That's the point I want to make. If it started at 20, it will determine your future life. I urge you, the importance of education in an area whereby you have a great find is critical. I do hope, I wish to end with Socrates then. I can't go Plato and end with Socrates. Yes, I wish to. Yeah. Education is not the filling of a vessel, but the lighting of a flame. I do hope that I have lit a flame similar to the one that was lit in the Olympic Games in Rio de Janeiro. But I pray that this flame will never be extinguished. And I want to end by a wise man, Nelson Mandela. I'll come to that. And I wish to quote, and I quote, education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. And may I change that quotation just for tonight. Education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change Guyana. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Professor, I recall as a boy having my mirth aroused by what my parents said to me about two great leaders. One was the leader of an oil-rich nation, and the other was the leader of an agro-based nation. The oil-rich leader said to the agro-based leader, oil don't spoil. Oil don't spoil. And the agro-based leader said, you can't eat it either. With that in mind, and keeping my eye on the original philosophy you mentioned, the original doctrine of respectful training, it can be observed that, particularly among individuals, those who can be described as the nouveau riche, not having the attitude that is commensurate with newfound wealth. With our newfound wealth, how do you see us, the importance of us concentrating on developing a new national philosophy of life?
How are you doing? Am I taking two questions or what? Okay.
Thank you very much for your question. It's good to know your name and where you're from. But I would like to think that Guyana has started on the correct footing to find that it is not. When I look at this audience this evening, and I scan the audience, I've seen young, middle-aged, elderly, and I've seen people standing outside. It tells me that the leadership has recognized that it's important to have dialogue with this particular thrust that we are in, finding oil. And I'm saying that's the first good start, and it's a start that the leadership must be complimented for, and that is dialogue with respect to all the citizens of Trinidad, of Guyana. So that's what I'm saying. The dialogue has started, and it does not happen overnight. The dialogue, I heard, will be continued.
Professor, good afternoon. My name is Kesran Charlin, Chief Engineer. Question to you, I heard you spoke about peace in the community where the oil revenue or the oil production might be passing through. You talk about gathering the peace, but then you didn't mention, I didn't hear you mention, if you did, but I wasn't paying any attention to that, but what would be the royalties? Because the peace starts with the royalties and it's being placed in the communities. Because one example is that I was in West Africa, and such communities like Brass, where you have energy working out of Italy, which is in Nigeria, and they sponsor that entire community with royalties. But still some people are disgruntled because of, doesn't seem to be a fair share of that what happening. So what is your input as in terms of getting something set up as in terms of the communities where this oil will be passing through in Guyana so that we don't have that situation that is occurring across the world, especially in Africa?
Thank you for your question. It's a very good question. Is that the reality is life has changed. We spoke of the experiences in Trinidad and Tobago. Even though it's not like in the Niger Delta in Nigeria, and I think that's what you're referring to in Africa. But in 1937, the people in the southwest part of Trinidad and Tobago under Uriah Butler, they had a riot, and one person, a policeman, was killed. One might say it was only for wages, and that may have been so. But when you look at the history, is that this community social responsibility, you have to start by not looking at the persons in the area just as another person. You have to look them as part of a stakeholder in the business. So before you go in there, now you have to start talking to them. You have to get their views. You have to make them feel they're and important. They are respectfully, so I respectfully suggest that you have to start talking with them. They have to be part of it. Now, every single project that we are doing in Trinidad, we have a community social responsibility, and still, fellas still striking at times. You know why? Because the world is saying, if you're passing that pipeline in my area, then I must be able to get some benefit for that. I'm not saying no, but I am saying the entire resources belong to everybody in Guyana. The fellow with the pipeline passing, the fellow with no pipeline passing, the entire resources belong. So we have to look at it from that perspective. But you are correct by saying there must be dialogue. That's where you start. People must discuss it. Right now in our area in southwest Trinidad, there's a lot of discussion when we are about to put on a Caribbean methanol plant in that area. And you have to have dialogue months before. You have to be part of the discussion. Before, you just need to go and put on a methanol plant or ammonia plant. with nothing. And that's why we cannot do it again. So the world has changed. My advice is that from day one, you know we're going to run pipeline today, we start the discussion. So the people believe they are part of the discussion and of the decision making. Or else, you will continue to have problems. Yes.
Thank you, Professor, for this very enlightening presentation. My name is Carla Benjamin. I'm just a patriot. I'm particularly concerned, Professor, about our lack of ability to defend this tremendous resource that we might be coming into. Right? If we cannot defend this, everything else about it will be unachievable. We live in a very terrible world these days. I'm sure you recognize this, you know this. I'm sure most of us here are part of the Dodo board. The Dodo board had no natural defense, and today it is extinct. I would hate to see us in Guyana becoming extinct. So we have to change our thinking, change our psychology, change our education, and put the priority where it belongs. Defense first. Thank you very much.
Good night, Professor Joguzo. My name is Kenneth Chance, called 6L, original. I'd like to give some comments on your positive remarks, praises to Mr. Trotman, Resource Minister. You talk about the men who come as contractors or contestants towards the oil development. You give a warning when it came down. Eric Williams said when it started out right, Trinidad was booming. Then they had people start out with 20%, then they came to 50%. Was in the area of the consultant. I think your wiseness we're trying to show, Mr. Raphael, and we in Guyana should think about the small man being the real man and enjoying our resources. So besides being educated, you'd be earning while you're learning to take over from a situation where we would end up in being neo-colonialist atomic, where people will be benefiting because of their education. But those who have the ability in sports, I remember my friend Brian Williams from Trinidad. I remember 1976, Bonham withdrew from Canada at the Olympic Games. Our team was one of the best boxing teams. Also, you talk about 20 the Olympic Games again. I guess you're showing that they must distribute the wealth so that the small man can get a chance, besides being educated, to be physically ready for challenging the world and the future of our youth. I'm 69-year-old, I might be dead and gone. I struggle for this return of democracy. So I know it's a good advice you gave, but we got to look at the corrupt and self-interest person. Thank you very much for your contribution.
Professor, I commend you, sir. You did a fantastic job. I like your cordiality. You weren't strict and straight. You were kind and moving around and entertaining, and it was comprehensive. My name is Dr. Lindley Gibordet, and I have some caveats. You may want to respond to them, but they are caveats for the governmental entities here. We are cognizant of the paucity of petroleum-related engineers in Guyana, and with 3 years before we start produce, we will not produce adequate amounts. Thus, we'll face an invasion of these engineers from our contiguous petroleum neighbors, Trinidad, Venezuela, and Brazil. I would like the government to be pointedly aware of this and to ensure that the contracts for those guys be given a time limit so our people can take over when they would have reached the levels of being able to take over. I thank you. Yes, thank you. There are political and economic implications in this thing. Political, of course, we have an ethnic divide in Guyana, and people are going to be aware of that. We have the economic end of it. It tends that wealth tends to gravitate to the top 5% of the community. A gentleman alluded to the money coming back to the masses. We don't want one queen bee and all the other bees producing. We would like some of those people to share in the largest of the oil wealth as we obtain it in Guyana. I'd like the members of the government to be pointedly aware of that too. We have very porous borders in Guyana. And with the refugee problem all over the world, I anticipate we're going to face some of these problems of people pouring into our country. How are we going to stop them? And how are we going to keep the wealth for the 700,000 people that make Guyana theirs? So I would like the government to be aware of that also. I have one comment for you, sir. On your projection of $55 to $75 per barrel of oil, I think that is being too ambitious, because with the push for alternate energy, the solar, the wind, etc., I see oil prices not going up to those levels, but stabilizing and actually coming down in time, because the use of the electric cars, etc., will impact on the use of oil for the oil industry as such. I thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I thank you, sir.
I'm going to be very brief with oil price. You are wrong and I am wrong. The only thing that's right is what I have in my hand here. And it's the closest. In 1986, December, I normally walk with this when I have an oil lecture. Professor Gainsbrick, you know how these lecturers operate in the US. At the beginning of the term, he said, write on a sheet of paper what will be the oil price at the end, last day of term. You know they give free marks in the US universities. And at the end of it, he said to it in 1 minute. No analysis, no thought. And at the end, on the last day, $10.87 per barrel. And it so happened that I was the closest thing. So every time I walk, I normally ask this, and I was given this, what will be the oil price next year?
Good night, everyone. I have a question. My question goes this way. You know, sir, you talked about, during the course of the lecture, you mentioned institutions like University of Trinidad and Tobago, National Energy Skills Center. I want to know if there's any measure in place for institutions like that, like National Energy Skills Center for Trinidad and Tobago, to be in Guyana, because I was opportunity to be trained in Trinidad and Tobago on drilling rigs operation. And that was Energy Skills Center. So I want to know if there's anything like that coming to Guyana in the immediate future, where young people will be trained in. That's my first answer.
First, I would like to thank you for your excellent address. I don't know how the oil money in Trinidad and Tobago is being used, but as a Guyanese, I have been worrying about the housing problem in this country. And I was wondering if in Trinidad and Tobago you use money for housing, especially for poor people, low-cost housing, poor people, elderly people. And if that is so, I think that our government, when our production gets on stream, should concentrate on housing, because in my opinion, we have a severe housing problem in this country. Lots of people can't afford to buy a house lot and take a loan from the bank and build a home. There are lots of people whose income is very small. And I feel that government, as well as other stakeholders, should put money into housing, low-cost housing, because in Guyana we have slums, you know. We have slums, at least we have a slum called Tiger Bay, and I've been writing about things like that. So we need to have money put into housing, low-cost housing, so that people can live comfortably wherever they are, whichever country they may happen to live. I thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Excellence Dazzle. I very much enjoyed your lecture. It was very educational. I learned a lot. My question, however, I noticed that you mentioned that oil production has a lot of risks attached to it. And so I would like to know if in Trinidad and if in Guyana, we should have a contingency plan or a disaster fund, so as when those things happen, if they do happen, we have a plan in place, or we have money to bring back up ourselves from a disaster.
Just for clarity, are you speaking about pollution?
I am, sir.
Okay, let me just respond. In Trinidad and Tobago, we have a National Oil Spill Contingency Plan, NOSCP. And we have divided the country into areas, and we have put specific oil companies in charge of various areas. Even it's such that it is so huge that the entire country is mobilized through the commander of the National Oil Spill Contingency Plan. So there is a plan, and that is in agreement. We also have an agreement with our neighbors. Perchance the oil spill goes in another territorial waters, and how we will approach that in terms of plan. Yeah, we do.
Good evening, Terry Fletcher, consulting engineer. Professor, I waited with bated breath for you to talk about two things. And you did talk about them, but in passing. Development plans and energy policies. Could you expand slightly, or to the limits of your constraints here, as to how Trinidad and Tobago has succeeded with operating its development plan, and whether it does have an energy policy, and how successful it has been?
Thank you very much. Thank you for that question. Very good question. Let me deal with energy policy first. Probably I'm guilty with this question. But every successive government I've worked for, since 1979 to the present time, has been unable to complete
and energy policy. They have always had a draft energy policy. And by the time, the minister said yes, one. And by the time they start a draft one, by the time they start running, galloping, by the second year, the third year, the draft is there. The last administration told me, a young, brilliant minister, he told me, I will be the first to ensure a policy. I move from the green paper and move the final policy. It's never good. Let me just explain to you. That does not mean that you don't have a policy. Because of every time a government minister utters a statement, that is government policy. I can say that with a level of confidence because I was permanent secretary for many years. I was permanent secretary for many years. And that is policy. It's just that it was not crafted into a final policy. Policy was going on that. That's the first one. We started a development plan. Dr. Ekman was a brilliant man. He started a 5-year development plan. And that was his basis to move. 5-year development plan. When the oil dollars started flowing, 5-year development plan went through the window. Was action, 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 action. Get this done, build this, build this, build that. But I am one of those who believe very strongly that development plan is critical in order to put a map, chart a map for the development of a country. I'm fully 100%. Yeah. Thank you for the question.
Good evening, Professor. Good evening. My name is Jason Barnes, and I'm a current student of the University of Guyana, pursuing a law degree. My question has to do with economic diversification. And one thing I know is that for every resource-rich nation, one of the most important aspects, or the most important issues, have to do with economic diversification. And given the drop in oil prices in 2015, what has been Trinidad and Tobago's response to that, given the fact that Trinidad and Tobago is highly dependent on petroleum and petroleum products, the exports of that. And one of the most important ways to prevent an economic recession is to reduce your dependence on commodity-based exports. And so what is Trinidad and Tobago's response to that? Because there's no telling when the oil price will go back up. It's a very volatile industry, so that's what I'd like to know. What has been the response?
Thank you very much for your question. We are in pain, and plenty pain. And the reason for that is as follows. Trinidad and Tobago has not diversified the economy. And that's the problem with an energy-rich country. That's right, we read about it earlier today. And I'm saying to you that we were $20 billion in deficit in terms of our budget. Why? Because you have low oil prices. I am chairman of Petrotrin and I see the numbers every Monday morning, every day. When the oil price goes, you are losing money. The question is, and I think that was being raised by the development plan, and I heard it earlier today, is that you all are in a good place, a great place, to see the mistakes that have been done by countries like Trinidad and Tobago, because we have made mistakes. And say, how do we do it differently than Trinidad and Tobago in order to diversify? It's good. We heard of agriculture today. And I was pleased to hear about that. So the answer specifically of Trinidad and Tobago, we have not done it. And now we are traveling in order to do various things. But what we have to do first, because we have strength, is diversify within the energy sector. And then move out on diversity within the energy sector, outside the energy sector. Good question. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Professor. Can we put our hands together for we can do it.